Let's start working on gem cleaner block entity. Hello everyone, this is Ali Reza. Welcome to the Mentor Code Lab. Now in previous episode, I designed the base structure of the GUI. However, as you see, I added 3 more slots, one for energy upgrade, speed upgrades, and one for fluid upgrades. I added some buttons on the right hand side, and I may not use them, I may use them, I don't know, but this is the finished GUI right now. Now here's the thing, I have a library and I'm expanding my library structure. It didn't finish before I started recording this video, and at the same time I prefer to show you the vanilla way of doing things before I start using my own library. Now I know I did use my library for the glue blocks, however for the gem cleaner I will start from scratch using the proper vanilla way of coding, and then when the gem cleaner is completely ready and rolling forward, that is when I will start tweaking it, refactoring it, and start using my own library. Now sometimes I will do it before finishing the product because, for example, the block class, well, we will finish it today, and at the end I will switch back to the library and you will see how fast and easier it is to develop your own block this way. For the gem cleaner, as you recall, I started using my library. However, you want to start with vanilla. The vanilla way is either using block with entity, or we extend the block and implement the block entity provider interface. Now we start with block with entity because it has some boilerplate that makes our life easier. Remember, we always need a codec. Let's add it: public static final map codec of the gem cleaner, and we call it codec equals to create codec, and we say gem cleaner colon new as the factory. Then we want to add our facing, so I will say public static final direction property facing equals to, actually I think I need to change it now, it's enum properties, enum property of the direction, yes please, and we call it facing equals to properties dot not facing, I will use horizontal facing. After that I want another property and we call it public static final boolean property, and it's not powered, it's lit, we call it properties dot lit. Okay, now we have all of that, we call this super, and then we need to get the codec, so we'll return the codec. We have the create block entity, get ticker. Now that we have the codec, let's start adding more stuff. For example, the rotate method, we return state.with facing, rotation.rotate, state.get facing. Then we have mirror, we return state.rotate, mirror.get rotation for the state.get facing. After that, we want to change the facing when we put this block on the ground. So we say get placement state, we say return this.get default state dot width facing comma context dot get horizontal player facing, and we want to take a look at the opposite direction, so get opposite. Then we have the append properties. In here we say builder dot add, and we have the facing and lit. Finally, we get where we want to work with block entity. Now before we create the block entity, we need to come back to gem cleaner BE and make sure that it extends block entity. If we don't do this, it will not work, and I will not touch anything else here. After we define the gem cleaner BE as being a block entity, we go into mod registries and find the block entities. Now here, as you see, I have few of them. I need to add a new one, and this is gem cleaner, and let's use the gem cleaner BE. Of course, I need to instantiate it, so this is gem cleaner equals to register for gem cleaner, and then mod blocks dot gem cleaner with gem cleaner BE colon new. We don't have the constructor, that's for that, but here I can say use mod block entities dot gem cleaner dot instantiate with the pause with the state. Now keep in mind, you will see some people say that, hey, do this, return new gem cleaner BE, and here you send in the pause and the state. Don't do this. It's not the proper way of instantiating a block entity. It will work, but it's not the proper way of instantiating it. You have the type as a gem cleaner right now. Use that type to instantiate it using the type. This is the proper way of instantiating a block entity. Then we have the get ticker. Now we say return return validate ticker, and this validate ticker comes from this block with entity. If you go there, you see this is the validate ticker method. If you are extending from block and implementing the block entity provider, you need to copy paste it into your own class so that it will work. Validate ticker, here we say we have the type, and then we want mod block entities dot gem cleaner as the checking BE, and then we want to provide a ticker. Now the ticker will be a lambda we call word, and the moment I'm typing word, take note that IntelliSense gives me the second option, word1, pause, state1, and the block entity. I want that, and here all we want to do is say that block entity dot tick. Now here's another thing. You will see that people say that, hey, send in the word, position, state, and block entity into the tick method, like something like this, word1, then pause and state1. Don't do this. Although I will keep it there and I will show you why you don't need to do this later. And by doing this, we are almost done in our base concept related to the block. Now, of course, if you have something like comparators or inventories and other things, this class can become bigger and bigger and bigger, handling things like onState replace, get render type, and other things. Now, keep in mind, the block with entity will not tell the system how to render the block. So you need to add one more thing, and that is get render type. And here you want to return block render type dot model. This means that, hey, we have a model, and if you don't do it, chances are that you will become invisible. Of course, it says that remove redundant method, but I remember that at some point, if I didn't have this, then we would have invisible blocks. Maybe it was changed in 1.21.5, I'm not sure. You can comment this and check in the game if you can see the block or not. If your block was invisible, then this can be the reason. We did handle everything that we can with the vanilla way of adding our block. However, as I said, I have a library, and I want to show you how easy it is to use the library. So instead of using block with entity, I will extend from my own library called gblock, okay? And it comes from Jira lib. Now that we have that, I don't need this codec. Believe it or not, I don't need this horizontal facing, and I don't need that lit. Instead of calling the super, now we have this model of calling the super. We have a setting, then we have block properties. Now take note, I can easily say has lit property. This will add the lit property, and I have has horizontal facing, so it will add the facing with horizontal facing for me. Now that I have that, I don't need the mirror, I don't need the rotate, I don't need the get placement, because all of that is handled inside gblock by itself. I don't need to append the properties, I don't need to add the render type, and finally I don't need to add the block entity when I get done with the rest of the thing. So I don't need to override the get codec, I just need to produce the codec with calling the create codec in the constructor after calling the super. Now for get ticker and create block entity, if I right click on this guy, it says create method tick in gem cleaner BE, and it will create this public void tick word block pause and block state. Now guess what? Pause is something that every block entity has as internal variable. So for example, if I say this dot pause, you see that I have the block pause of the block entity. So why should I send it in? Honestly, I don't know. And people like kaupenjoe insist on sending the block pause. You don't need to do that. People like kaupenjoe insist on sending the word in. Now guess what? Block entity already is providing the word, so you don't need to send that. And when you have the word, you can say get block state from the position, so you have the block state of the block related to block pause. So none of this is needed. If none of this is needed and you are going to do the vanilla way, here you need to change things. You can't remove the word, pause, state, or block entity. This part of lambda should remain the same. However, inside this tick method, boom, get done with it, and it's already finished. And this will be your get ticker for the vanilla, and you will not really need to send the word, position, or state. However, in gblock, I'm handling it, so you don't need to even produce that. The only thing that is changed is now you need to implement iTick, and it comes from Jiraiya GBase interface. And iTick has this tick and tick client, and you see that it has get ticker, get state. Don't worry about that. Only the tick method, and you see that the tick method doesn't provide provide any parameters for you. So finally, you need to create the constructor, and this should get rid of this error. Here we go. I forgot that one. So you need to add the implementation of block entity provider. That is when this thing knows that it has a block entity related to itself. And right now we still have the problem because we didn't tell the system how to handle the block entity other than this part. And honestly, that should be the only problem here. Let me fix this part first, and then I will go back to the block entity. Now, in this part, we don't need to give the block entity this way to the system. After these properties, so I have the has lit, I have has horizontal facing, I will have a new property called dot block entity properties. Means that, hey, I want to provide properties related to a block entity. Now, the first thing we want to do is set new block properties BE, and this block entity is redundant. We can remove that. We provide an empty lambda that goes into, and this is actually a supplier. So we say mod block entities dot gem cleaner, and before closing everything, I will come back forward because I want to add another properties on top of this block properties BE, and I will say dot should tick. Means that this block entity has a tick method. Okay, and now we can focus on our block entity. If you're following vanilla, this should be the way to go for the block entities. However, you'll notice that our registry has a little bit of a problem. The reason is that you will not have this type as the parameter, and if I remove it and come back here, you will see that this error is gone, and instead of type here, I will say that, hey, I'm using the mod block entities dot gem cleaner, and again, this is the vanilla way of handling things. So ignore this implements tick, just this is your vanilla block entity. Now from here on, anything that you do on this block entity is actually the vanilla code, and you write your logic in the tick, you add different attributes to the class, different helper methods to the class, anything goes. Okay, now if I want to use my library, I have two different interfaces that I can implement if I want. One of them is iTick and the other one is iUpdatable. Now iTick is related to this G block because you notice that I'm not providing the block entity directly. The iTick interface has this create ticker that is being called inside the G block, and it will create the tick method provider for the system, okay, on the server side and on the client side. Now, we normally don't do things on the client side, but it's just there. So if you are using G block, don't forget that you need to implement the iTick. Now let's talk about iUpdatable. Actually, I talked about it a little bit inside the Go blocks, but I want to dive into it and talk about what is the difference. When you want to sync the data between the client and server, you have two different ways to go. And we will dive into the theory behind it in another video, but I will briefly talk about it here. One way is to handle sending the packets from server to the client manually whenever you feel like you need to send the packet. The other way is to let Minecraft make the decision on the fact that they need to update the chunk. And whenever the Minecraft needs to update chunk data, that is when you will use a system that will automatically update the data between client and server. Let's take a look at that. This updatable BE in my library, as you see GiraLib, is actually a class, an abstract class that extends the block entity and implements the iUpdatable. Okay, now as you see, I have is dirty boolean. If I need to, at any point, I will mark something is dirty and I will use this flag later. Now forget about the constructor. It has only a field inside the properties of the block entity to set the is dirty. If you don't know how to use the fields, just go back and watch the Go blocks. I had used it there. And now let's talk about this update method and on tick end. Then we will come back and talk about these two. Now, the update method is the heart of this class. Means that if I extend any block entity from updatable BE, every time I change something, I will call the update instead of marking things dirty. Now, in the update, I will flag the is dirty to true, and then I will check if I should wait for the end of the tick method? If yes, then I will wait for the end of the tick method and things will happen automatically here. Else, if I'm not waiting for the end, I will immediately mark the block entity as dirty. And then if I'm not on the client side, I will update listeners in the world for this block position with the state that we are in, and this is notifying everything. Okay, now this is one of the two major facts to update and sync the data between server and client. Update listeners is doing lots of things behind the scene actually. If you find the usages for this update listeners on the word and dive into the vanilla code with using the find usages, you will see that it's doing a lot of things, and one of the things is that it will send packets from server to client with the payloads. So this is letting the system know that it needs to update everything. Of course, if we need to wait for the end tick, we will do the same thing on the onTick end method. Now, what is the onTick end and why should we wait to the end of the tick? If your logic is not doing anything special, it's just, I don't know, maybe something like the GUI. Okay, it's just ticking and doing something for itself. It doesn't have energy, it doesn't have fluid, especially if it doesn't have any sort of inventory or storage, then that's okay. You don't need to wait for the end of the tick method to update the listener. However, if you have one of these things, inventories or energy containers or fluid containers or any other storage in your block entity, then you need to wait until the tick logic is end, because you may tweak things in the tick logic constantly. For example, you remove something from the input slot, you will put something on the output slot, and you will reduce the fluid, you will reduce energy, and you suddenly see that there is an energy income, so you will add to the energy. And if you want to update listeners on each step, that's crazy. You don't need to do that. You need to handle everything related to the logic first, and then at the very end, just call update listeners once. So if you have any sort of inventory or storage inside the block entity, you will use another class that is extending upon these, and that is called synced.be. Synced.be will flag this should wait and tick to true, and it has the tick method. Don't worry, we will go into there, and then it will handle the updating at the end of the tick, so that it makes sure that everything is already handled inside the block entity, and now is the time to update the listener. Okay, what is these two? As you see, we have two initial chunk data NBT. If you read the documentation, it says that it's an observable, and this is sent alongside the initial chunk data, as well as when the block entity implements to update packet. We already have it on top, and then it decides to use the default server to client block entity update packet. Long story short, from this complex explanation, two initial chunk data NBT decides that, hey, this chunk data is changed and I need to update the NBTs, and at the same time I need to sync the data between the client and the server, so I will send a packet from server to client. That packet contains every information that client needs to know about the server, and as you see, all I'm doing here is getting the NBTs and then write the NBT on the block entity, and that's it. However, to update packet, as the documentation suggested, should be overwritten, and you see that here I say block entity update server to packet.create, and I send this block entity as the parameter. And by inheritance, when I'm inside the gem cleaner, the word this would mean gem cleaner instance in the game. Okay, so far so good. So we have the updatable. Now tickable, as you see, is extending the updatable. All it's adding is a tick method and tick client. Now take note, the tick method has its own body. You shouldn't override it. And it goes with, if the tick is 0, so we are on the very first tick, do on internal first tick. On internal first tick, what we do is that we register default fields, we register fields, and we call on first tick. Now on first tick is something that you can override and put your data in it if you need to. And you take note that the tick is public, but these are protected, because this is the tick method that the block will see. Okay, this is where you validate method and call the tick. It's actually this method on vanilla. vanilla. If I'm gonna use that library, I don't need to override the tick method. Then, if we are not on the first tick, or if we are in a special interval that we defined as tick rate, we use the onInternal tick, and onInternal tick is again checking if the tick logic is not null, then it reads the tick logic and the tick method. Tick logic here is any class that is extending iTick logic. It can be an internal class, it can be an external class, it doesn't matter. If we assigned it to the block entity, then we call the tick method on that, and then it will do the tick. Now, I could use on tick here, okay, and like on first tick, and get done with it. But I want to write a library related to tick logic that would be close to behavior trees, and this is when that tick logic separation will come handy, really handy. So we don't need to write the tick or tick client. The registered default fields, as you see, is writing some default values with setters and getters. If you want to, is writing some fields with some getters and some setters. And honestly, if you want to add your own stuff like fluid, like energy, and you want to get the values and you are internally handling the tweak of amount, this is the way to add them. Okay, now let's go back to our block entity. As I said, normally you have this on vanilla. However, this time we want to use that tickable BE. Now remember, we have one more thing, and that is synced BE. And as I said, this synced BE is another class that is extending from updatable. The main responsibility of this class is to make sure that it's syncing the data on the entity. So you will see that, for example, we have should sync that reads the should sync, and then we have a sync method. Here we will sync the data if we need to, and then we have get syncables somewhere, I think, or I didn't add it here because I do want you to overwrite that. However, the tick logic and anything else is internally changed here and there. And because I know for the fact that gem cleaner has input slots, output slots, fluid tanks, and an energy container, I need to use synced BE, and I will say that the synced BE is type of gem cleaner BE. Okay, now by doing it, you are already using my library. However, we have a little bit of problem. You remember, we have to add something for the tick logic, and we are not doing it here. We aren't prepared for that. So if I take a look at air bomb, for example, all I'm doing here is calling the super, and then I have this. Let's copy it and come back into the gem cleaner and take a look. I say that, hey, get the properties of this block entity and find its tick logic. Please set it to something. Now, as you see, I'm using this. However, here it says new tick logic because tick logic is an internal class, and I tend to keep it as an internal class so far for this one too. So I will open it. The tick logic is iTick logic of, now this should be the type of the block entity, gem cleaner BE, and block entity fields of the same block entity. So it's gem cleaner BE, and finally I just need to use the tick logic. Okay, now this iTick logic implementation needs to override some methods. Normally you would see that it says override methods, but I think it's 2025 version of IntelliJ IDEA or something like that. It says make tick logic abstract. Now if you open the more actions, it says implement method, and all the methods that you need to write is the tick. As I said, normally we don't work with the tick client, so we have a tick method there, and just by doing this we moved away from the vanilla definition, and we are already using our library to its full potential. By default, this block now has the lit property, has the horizontal facing. It already knows that it's type of gem cleaner. It will create the gem cleaner BE and everything else. And in gem cleaner BE, we have this internal class that we can use to write our tick method. Now, here is the thing. If you so want to, you can make a new package and call tick logic. And here I will say new Java class, and I will call it gem cleaner TL for tick logic. And I will get it from here into here, and finally it says again make it abstract. I just need to write the tick method, and I will remove this, and I will say that this is new gem cleaner TL, and that's it. This is your block entity. See how clean it is? Now it will not remain clean. It will become bigger and bigger, and there is a reason that I broke this into its own class and didn't go with the same definition of internal classes as the GUI, because the GUI was simple. You just have a little bit of the code in the tick logic and nothing is going on in the block entity itself. So that's it. But inside gem cleaner, things will change because we will have energy handling, we will have fluid handling, we will have crafting handling, and those things will really sit inside this block entity class. Again, the tick logic will increase and reduce the energy and fluid, and it will have a progress time, so things will become bigger and bigger and bigger. Because of that, we need to make sure that we are handling everything properly. Now that we have our block entity ready, in the next video we will start writing the code to make things work.
If you like these videos, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on that bell so that when I publish a new video, you will get informed. Have fun everyone. Bye.